If you've been searching, can myEcon help self-employed people? Is myEcon good for gig workers? myEcon for freelancers? myEcon for independent contractors? Or can myEcon help if you work for yourself? Then this video is going to be for you because a lot of self-employed people, gig workers and independent contractors are carrying a kind of financial pressure that regular W-2 workers don't always understand, right? Your money is inconsistent. Your schedule is inconsistent. Your expenses are different, right? Your taxes hit differently. Stress hits differently. And when you work for yourself, or even partly for yourself, it can feel like you're constantly juggling movement without ever really feeling stable. And that's real, right? That's a real feeling. That's something that's really hard to get through every single day. A lot of people on the outside look at self-employment and gig workers and they think freedom. But what they don't see is the uncertainty. They don't see the weeks where the cash comes in a little weird. They don't see the pressure of tracking what matters and missing what matters. They don't see the mental drain of being the worker, the manager, the planner, the problem solver, all at the same time. So when somebody in that position starts looking at myEcon, they're not always asking the same generic question like, is this good? What they are really asking is, can this help me get my financial life under control when my income, expenses, and responsibilities don't look like everybody else's? That's the real question. That's the smart question. So let me get straight to it. Can myEcon help self-employed people or gig workers? Yes. For the right person, it absolutely can, but not because it's some fantasy answer, not because self-employment automatically makes somebody a perfect fit for myEcon, and not because one platform suddenly solves every money problem that comes with working for yourself. It can help because a lot of self-employed people and gig workers are not just dealing with an income issue. They're dealing with a structure issue, a planning issue, a tax awareness issue, and a discipline issue, right? That combination creates pressure fast. And if nobody helps them think more clearly about those things, they can stay busy for years without ever really feeling financially solid. That's the trap. Now, let me say this clearly here. Working for yourself does not mean you are bad with money. Driving for Lyft or Uber does not mean that you are failing. I drove for Lyft and Uber while I was working retail. I actually didn't mind doing it, but that's not the point. The point is that when your money comes in differently, your financial life needs to be handled differently, right? A lot of people never adjust to that. They keep using employee style thinking in a self-employed reality. And that mismatch causes damage because self-employment exposes every weakness. If your planning is weak, it shows. If your tracking is weak, it shows. If your spending is emotional, it shows, right? If your tax awareness is weak, it's going to show. Discipline. If it's weak, it's going to show. That is why this conversation matters, because some people just don't need just more hustle. They need more control. So the first way that myEcon can help self-employed people or gig workers is through financial organization. A lot of self-employed people live in motion, but not in structure. They're working, they're driving, they're delivering, they're freelancing, they're invoicing, they're juggling apps, chasing deposits, but they're not really organized. And that catches up with people because movement can trick you into thinking you are in control. You're busy, so you feel productive. You're earning something, so you feel okay. You're staying in motion, so you assume you're making progress. But busyness and control are not the same thing. That is a lesson a lot of self-employed people learn the hard way. Because if you're not organized, money leaks hide. Tax pressure sneaks up. Spending gets rationalized. And small financial mistakes start stacking until they become expensive. So when something helps a person get more organized around their financial life, that matters because clarity calms chaos. So the second way that myEcon can help is through cash flow awareness when income is inconsistent. And this is a huge one. A regular paycheck creates a rhythm for people. Gig work often doesn't, right? Freelance work often doesn't. Independent contractor, money comes in uneven, right? Unpredictable or in bursts. And when money comes in unevenly, people often make emotional decisions with it. A good week makes them relax too hard. A bad week makes them panic too hard. Then they end up swinging between overconfidence and stress. That's exhausting, and it makes long-term stability harder than it needs to be. So if someone is self-employed, one of the biggest wins is learning how to think beyond the current week, right? Beyond the current app payout, beyond the current invoice, the current rush. Because if all your financial decisions are based on whatever just happened, you stay unstable. That's why cash flow awareness matters so much for this kind of person. Not just how much came in, but how it moves, how it gets allocated, right? How much of it is actually usable? How much of it is being spoken for already? How much of it is lying to you because it looks like more than it really is, right? And that matters. The third way that myEcon can help self-employed people or gig workers is through tax mindset. Now, this is where a lot of people get hit in the mouth financially, because when you work for yourself, taxes are different. When you work for yourself, taxes are different. You really need to know that. If you don't already know that, that is a very big thing. One of the biggest things that you need to understand, all right? There's no comfortable illusion that everything is being handled for you. Right now, you feel it. And a lot of people don't prepare for that reality well. They earn, they spend, they move, they stay busy, but they don't think strategically enough about the tax side until the pressure shows up. Then the panic starts. That is where a lot of gig workers and self-employed people get blindsided. Not because they were incapable, because they were operating without enough financial awareness. So when somebody starts thinking more intentionally about how their money life works as a self-employed person, that matters, because the goal is not just to earn. The goal is to keep more control over what you earn, right? That is a different mindset. For a lot of independent gig workers, that mindset shift is way overdue. All right. The fourth way that myEcon can help is through changing how people see their money habits. And this is important because a lot of self-employed people confuse flexibility with freedom. They think because there is no boss standing over them, they're free. But if their money habits are weak, they're not free. They're just unstructured. And unstructured people often mistake improvisation for intelligence. That gets expensive, because if you're always winging it, you're not building anything strong. You're just surviving creatively. A lot of gig workers are great at getting through the week. Far fewer are great at building a real financial foundation. That's different. So if something helps a person become more honest about their habits, their patterns, and the way they handle money, that matters. Because freedom without discipline is going to turn into pressure. The fifth way that myEcon can help self-employed people or gig workers is through helping them think like an owner instead of just a worker. There's a big difference there. This is the biggest mindset shift of all, and it's hard. But a lot of self-employed people still think like employees with irregular pay. They work, they get paid, they react, they repeat. But real growth often begins when they stop thinking only like the labor and start thinking like the operator. That changes everything. Now the question becomes, how am I structuring this? How am I handling this? How am I building this? How am I protecting myself from my own inconsistency? How am I making sure I don't stay trapped in constant unpredictability forever? That's a different mindset. Mindset matters because a person can work hard for years and still stay fragile if they never change the way they think about their financial life. So let me ask you something here really quickly. And I want you to answer this in the comments, because I think it's going to hit a lot of people who work for themselves. All right. What is the hardest part of being self-employed or doing gig work financially? Inconsistent income, taxes, overspending, or never feeling fully stable. For me, it would be overspending after a good week, right? I would do a whole lot of, when I was driving for Lyft and Uber, I would do a whole lot of airport work down in Pittsburgh. And when I would do that, I'd make a lot of money on those days. So it would come in and I would be like, I made a ton of money, and I'd overspend it. And that was a shift that I had to do in my own head when I was doing that, because I was also working at the time. But drop your answer to that in the comments. All right. I think a lot of people are dealing with one of those very difficultly. And a lot of them probably feel like nobody really understands it. So the sixth way that myEcon can help is through showing people that more income is not always the first fix. This is where some viewers may get uncomfortable, but it needs to be said. A lot of self-employed people assume their only problem is that they need to make more money. Sometimes that's true, but sometimes they already have enough movement coming in to be doing better than they are doing. The deeper issue is what happens after the money hits your bank account. No plan, no categories, no discipline, no structure, no strategy, no intentional handling. When that is the case, more income alone does not create stability. It creates more instability. Bigger versions of the same mistakes. That's why some people stay broke at higher levels. Not because money never came in, because control never showed up. And that truth is uncomfortable, but it's also freeing, because if the whole problem was only external, people would be powerless. But if part of the problem is internal, in habits, awareness, and structure and discipline, then improvement is possible. That's what you have control over. That's good news, right? So the seventh way that myEcon can help self-employed people or gig workers is through lowering financial shame. A lot of independent workers feel secretly embarrassed by how unstable things feel. They may look busy, they may look ambitious, they may look like they're chasing freedom. But underneath that, some of them feel disorganized, behind, and constantly one bad week away from serious pressure. That feeling gets heavy, and shame makes people hide. It makes them avoid looking closely. It makes them act casual about things that are actually hurting them. It makes them perform confidence instead of building confidence. And that's dangerous, because hidden pressure has a way of getting worse when nobody confronts it honestly. So when someone starts learning how to face their money reality without pretending, that matters, right? Because honesty is where real builders start. The eighth thing that myEcon can help do is by helping somebody build a stronger base before they try to scale anything. This is important, especially for people with side hustles and gig income. A lot of them think the next answer is simply more. More hours, more gigs, more rides, more clients, more hustle, more movement. But if the foundation underneath that movement is weak, scaling just multiplies the mess. That's the part that people miss. You can increase activity without increasing strength. And if you do that long enough, burnout usually shows up before real stability does. So for a lot of self-employed people, the smarter question is not how do I do more? It's how do I get stronger with what I'm already doing? That is where maturity starts. Now, let's talk about who this is most likely to help. myEcon is going to be a strong fit for the self-employed person, independent contractor, or gig worker who is feeling tired of financially being messy. The person who knows they need more structure, the person who wants better control over uneven income, the person who wants to think better about taxes, cash flow, and financial habits, the person who is willing to stop winging it, the person who wants to build more stability, not just more movement. That person can benefit. Who is it probably not going to help much? The person who wants a shortcut without discipline. The person who wants to stay financially loose, but somehow create a strong financial outcome anyway. The person who mistakes being busy for being organized. The person who wants the feeling of independence without the responsibility that real independence requires. That person is going to struggle no matter what they're doing. because no system can fully compensate for somebody who refuses structure. That needs to be said clearly. All right, so let me answer the question directly, like I always do when I end the video. Can myEcon help self-employed people or gig workers? Yes, if what they need is better financial organization, stronger cash flow awareness, more intentional tax thinking, healthier money habits, and a mindset that moves them from chaos towards control. No, if what they want is a fantasy shortcut while continuing to operate with loose habits and no structure. That's the real answer. And honestly, that is why I think more self-employed people need to stop asking only, how do I make more? And start asking, how do I become stronger with what I'm already making? That's the better question, because self-employment without structure is a trap. But self-employment with strong financial thinking can become something completely different. That is when the real shift happens. So if you're self-employed, if you're doing gig work, or you're trying to build income outside a normal job, and you're wondering whether myEcon could help, here's the truth. It can. Absolutely. If you're willing to get more organized, think more intentionally, handle your financial life like somebody building something real instead of somebody constantly improvising under pressure. That's where the value is. So if this video helped you, hit that subscribe button, because I'm building this playlist to break myEcon down in a real world, no BS way. Again, answer this in the comments. What's the hardest financial part of being self-employed or doing gig work? Inconsistent income, taxes, overspending after a good week, or never feeling fully stable? That is a conversation a lot of people need to have. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.